really understand where the business needs to be. Listen to the keywords that people and stakeholders are saying they want the business to be.
Pros and cons.
Welcome to Pros and Cons, Engagement Unplugged. I'm Laura Smith.
And I'm Brian Rowley.
Okay, so today we're talking about something a lot of marketers run into at some point, a rebrand. They sound exciting, but in reality, we all know they're messy, complex, and they touch every part of an organization. We're digging into what it really takes to rebrand an organization, what to keep, what to change, and how to bring people along for the ride.
But before we dive in and introduce our guest today, I feel like there's been a lot of rebrands in the news lately. And Laura, I guess one of the questions that I have for you is, are there any that actually stand out that you've heard about? And I'm just curious to get some of your thoughts in regards to what you think of them.
I feel like the more recent, closer to home ones are like the HBO Max to Max, back to HBO Max situation, which was like, obviously I'm a big fan, but it's been very, confusing and convoluted. And then I think the one that's probably the most, I wouldn't call it controversial, but just got a lot of hype was Cracker Barrel.
Yeah.
Right? That restaurant company, old school to trying to rebrand. So those are two that come to mind, which I find to be interesting because Cracker Barrel got so much attention over a logo change.
Yeah, and it was actually not even a complete logo. Like, it wasn't like, well, it was because it just removed an individual from the logo. But like visually, I felt like it wasn't that big of a move, but it was so controversial once it happened. It was like it hit every piece of news that there was when it related to marketing.
And that poor CMO.
I know. Right? She was new too, wasn't she?
Yeah, I think so, but just be careful what you do, Brian. And but it's like interesting because I think like someone like myself who I've never been to a Cracker Barrel. I know what it is and I know where they are, but like it didn't bother me because it's like I didn't have a lot of connection to the brand and all that. So whereas the HBO one, it felt like, what are you doing? Like we just got it down to like Max. Why are we going back to HBO Max? So I feel like it just hit differently, but I know there was so much passion that was put into like the response to Cracker Barrel that it's just interesting, like how we as marketers really are influencing a lot of it's like, it just goes to show like everything we do while we think it's really internal and close to our own brand, it impacts so many people that touch the brand. So
yeah, there's a lot of passion around brands and passion that you don't really know exists until you have one of those moments. And thankfully, in neither of our careers, we've had those moments, which is great. But I'm sure that people who do this for a living, I'm sure that they see this a lot. And it's actually the reason we're having this conversation today.
Yes, so let's dive in. So it's pretty clear that rebrands are never as simple as they look from the outside. There's a lot more going on behind the scenes than just the new logo, which is why we're really excited for this conversation. Today's guest has led multiple rebrands over her career, including a recent full-scale global rebrand. She's built and led teams through major transformation moments, so she understands both the strategy and the reality of making it happen. And we want to welcome Sarah Moss. Welcome, Sarah.
Hey, how are you both?
We're really well. Thanks for joining us.
We're excited to have you here.
I'm excited too. I want to know what Cracker Barrel is.
Oh, right.
Oh, yeah.
Yes. It's a U.S. business. That's so, oh, gosh. You're going to have to Google that one, Sarah, to read all about it.
I will, for sure.
Yeah, it's a food establishment, but I mean, honestly.
I kind of guessed that one.
Yeah, it's one that, well, there's two parts to it. It's food, and then they have a significant retail side of their business, which I wasn't aware of until the controversy broke. But it was. We'll send you some information after this because it's really quite fascinating how little they made in terms of a change and how significant it was when the way in which people reacted. But let's keep in touch with Anywhere Now. I mean, you just went through a big rebrand. And I know one of the things that we wanted to talk about, and probably a good way for us to kick off was really, what was the real goal behind it? And in regards to making that rebrand, like what needed to actually change?
So I guess the answer in short was that we really needed to create clarity and credibility. We'd outgrown the Anywhere 365 brand, and it really didn't reflect where the business was headed or how customers are actually using us. So that was kind of the driver. And really, I suppose when I joined, it had just got to the point where we'd acquired a couple of other businesses. We were growing through acquisition, and the brand was, I think, it felt a little bit stuck, and it really wasn't where we were going. So we needed to kind of reinvigorate the brand, the direction of the business, and then we sort of had to decide how we were going to get there. And I think that the color palette played an important part, because the colors that we had been using were, I suppose, may have been perceived as being slightly outdated. They didn't necessarily sort of convey the passion that we had as a business of where the energy center of the business was coming from. So I think that was really the goal, was to create that, I suppose, stake in the ground in terms of, right, that's who we were. And it wasn't just about the brand for us. We also changed the name. So it was then very much about, this is Anywhere Now. And that was really, I suppose, the big part that drove the direction of the logo, the rebrand, the colors, the palette, everything. So that's kind of where it started, really.
And did you know, like, coming into your role, were you ready for this rebrand? Like, was that already a decision, or did you have to be part of that decision making to say this is needed?
It was funny, actually, because it was our CEO had sort of said, I think the board would love to see a rebrand. And that was like, whoa, hey, great. I love a rebrand. Let's go. So he'd mentioned it. And I just got straight into it. Stuff like that, I guess it fuels my fire. And to go in and have the trust and the opportunity to go. This was in my first 6 weeks of starting as well. So it was like, right, let's go. And then, so I started in the November of 24, and we wanted to launch the direction at the January sales kickoff, or the global kickoff. So we went full steam ahead with briefing agency, a different agency from the one that we'd used in the past, and one that I had used, to kind of see where they would with a full brief. And I actually looked back at the brief that I gave them this morning before this session to kind of go, okay, what did I say? And they nailed it. They completely came back with, we wanted to hold on to our heritage. We wanted to kind of represent the fact that we were a Dutch founded organization. So orange played a huge part in where, our roots and where our headquarters is as an office. And yeah, we nailed the logo within 6 weeks.
That's very fast.
That's actually incredibly fast. And so kudos to you. But I guess, when you look back at it now, and you've done this a few times, Anywhere Now is not the only time you've done this, but in your opinion, like, what actually makes a rebrand successful? So how do you know that it actually worked and you accomplished exactly what you were trying to out of the gate?
I guess it's probably like, when you go to buy a new house and you go around and you visit different places and you walk into that one house and you go, this is it. I can feel it. I can see us living here. I can see how I would decorate it. And you instantly have that vision of, that is exactly what I wanted it to be. And I think it does come down to you understanding the business. It does come down to you understanding where the business wants to be, and probably the things that the business hasn't been that it's always hoped it would be. And like you say, it's not just been at Anywhere Now, it's been in previous organizations, and even when I've done things for myself or in my husband's businesses as well. So I think I'm one of those people that lies awake, wakes up in the middle of the night, and that's the first thing that like drops into my head. And I replay it. And I think in many aspects of my life, I'm a perfectionist, and others absolutely not. But when it comes to creativity, it kind of, that's my thing, I think. So it was seeing the logo, presenting variations of those logos to the leadership team, and them going, oh, I like this one, and me going, that's the one I love. So I think that it's definitely a gut instinct as well, but it is making sure that you have that buy-in from stakeholders that, obviously it needs to matter to.
Right. And that's, you had like that winning moment, because that doesn't always happen. And I'm sure in your examples or over your career, that hasn't always been the case, because that's part of it. It's that internal and that leadership buy-in, or just not even just a leadership, because I think the big part of it is getting all those departments involved and the key stakeholders, and trying to make sure everybody, well, it may not be everyone's same choice, but everyone's comfortable with the path forward, because everyone internally has to own it, right? So did you have, or have you had in some of these experiences, those really difficult stumbling blocks internally to try to convince?
Yes, absolutely. So I think there have been in multiple examples in different businesses that I've worked for. There are always people that have had a longer tenure. They've been very comfortable with the brand as it was. And when they see change, they're just not necessarily comfortable with change.
Yeah, I also think, it's, and you touched on this a little bit, but I mean, it's a growth piece as well. I mean, businesses grow, people grow, right? And so as the business grows and potentially outgrows who they were, it's important to make sure that you keep up with that when you're explaining it to the market. So we're talking about sort of the creative elements, there's very visual elements to rebrand, but there's also messaging, there's also all of those elements that aren't quite as prominent in terms of the discussions that you're having, but they're really important to the people who are working with the brand. So can you talk a little bit about, so you obviously have the visual, the logo, but other things that you were taking into consideration during that as you're sort of making this change?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, what we ended up doing, and this is probably a good place to start, is that what I did was created a monster spreadsheet. Where did the brand touch? Which departments did it touch? Made sure that we had a stakeholder from each department to kind of go, right, this is what we're doing. This is what we need to understand from your section of the business. What documentation does the brand touch? What do we need to do to elevate this, the messaging? How do we go to market in a smarter way? So we used this enormous spreadsheet, and I was supported by an amazing person in my team, Hillary, to go through each of the departments and roll that out, or understand what they needed and get them to feedback what those priorities were. And then on a weekly basis, went through with each of them what we had, what we needed to do, and what needed to be completely reworked. That then, obviously, I mean, like I say, that to get an agreement on a logo within 6 weeks was amazing. We launched it publicly on the 2nd of April last year. So I think it's about making sure that you've got that buy-in from the stakeholders from each team, and letting them guide you on the priorities of things that the brand touches, and how you help support them rolling those pieces of material out. But as you say, it's not just a creative project, it's a lot wider than that.
It's so interesting, because when Brian and I came on to BrightSign, we didn't have to do a rebrand per se. I mean, the brand hasn't, we've evolved, I would say, from how we show up in marketing and how we show up, in sales presentations and things like that. So that we've definitely evolved where the brand was before our time. But just the exercise of trying to figure out where all the brand lives, because we still, are finding places where we're like, oh my God, that's like the old look and feel. How did that carry into something? But you're never going to catch it all. And I think your team sounds like they did a great job in getting the alignment across departments, because there's still things that people now internally are saying, oh, this probably needs the brand team to look at this. Yeah. And so that is just such an undertaking, I guess, is my point there, because I know we felt it, where it just felt so overwhelming to think we can get just the slight evolution into place across everything quickly. Yeah,
and that for us it was quite funny. There was an image of a woman with all these applications around her. We called her the bee lady, because she basically looked like she was being swarmed by bees. And occasionally bee lady turns back up in the middle of a presentation deck, and I literally lose my mind. And I think that there's always that one thing that you absolutely detested about your old brand, imagery wise, that, as you say, just pops back up, and you're like, where did she come from? How on earth does she even still exist? And what on earth was that person thinking when they used it? So I think that there is some, this is terrible, I can't believe I'm about to say this, but there is some pleasure when somebody does do something like that, of you kind of picking up the hitting them up on Teams and just going, what on earth were you thinking? And you kind of get that little power surge back going, I created this brand and you are not sticking to the guidelines. And that's another thing. We had to make sure that we'd got very strict brand guidelines. And a new tone of voice and all of that good stuff at the same time. So policing the post brand rollout is an equally challenging task, I would say.
Yeah, I don't think people realize how important that is. And you had said it as kind of a control piece. And I think the important part to it is people tend to like consistency with a brand. So if you've got consumers that are working with you or partners that are working you, consistency in the brand goes a long way. And I can relate to what you just said, because I literally was in a meeting 2 weeks ago and sitting around a table and someone threw something up on a display and had said, before I even start talking to this, they said, Rowley's going to have a problem with this. And so I was like, yes, let's take it down. Right. Because it's true. There are things where there's a reason why. And quite honestly, when Laura came on board, a lot of the focus was on brand, right? Like, what is the brand message? What are we trying to do? How are we trying to evolve it? And we've made a great name for ourselves and our business, but the important side to it was being consistent with how the brand looks, shows, and feels and shows up in places is incredibly important. And I think it's starting to resonate, but it does not for lack of a lot of work to try to make sure that it's consistent.
It's very true. And I think that what I tried to do was treat people like adults and involve them early. And as you said a little while ago, that change can be quite threatening to certain individuals when they feel it's being imposed upon them. So we tried to make sure that we were really clear on the rationale, what the risks were and the trade-offs were from the start. And we explained why we were changing what we were changing and why we weren't changing other things. So I think that, teams push back on certain things, but it was all taken into account. And I think that that's what you have to do. You have to make sure everyone feels that they're heard, but ultimately you have to be confident with the direction in which you're going, especially when you do have that buy-in. And then I think it's basically just around that clarity of consistency with what you're rolling out, when you're rolling out, and why you're rolling out what you're doing. And we were lucky. People always kind of want to push back and say that they're not comfortable with things, but the instant MO, I suppose, is to resist. But actually, in this particular case with the Anywhere Now rollout, it was so welcomed because it was so different. And I think when I looked at my briefing notes this morning, I had said we needed to appear like a phoenix out of the flames. It was shedding skin. It was growing up. It was moving forward. It was future ready. It was dynamic. It was edgy. It was all of those things. And I think that's another really strong point that I'd like to make, is that if you are having to go through a change and you are looking to take on a project, is really understand where the business needs to be. Listen to the keywords that people and stakeholders are saying how they perceive they want the business to be, and then kind of put them into a big blender and see what comes out, because ultimately those are the driving words that allowed me to create the brand and brief the agency. It was, where do you want to go? How do you want to be seen? How do you want to talk? How do you want to resonate with partners? How do you want to make the partners feel? And it was where does the business touch? Who do you work with? And how do you feel that they perceive you right now in your current brand? And that was really helpful too. So, if you have people that you can reach out to and just ask really honest questions without sort of overstepping a line, you can really help yourself moving forward as well.
Yeah, I think it's it's so interesting because of the internal alignment piece. I think it does. Like, I think the legacy folks potentially are going to have a harder time. And I know Brian and I went through this a bit, just even with the evolution of just trying to say that there's a reason why we need to kind of grow up a bit and to be looked as more sophisticated. And when customers or partners or people are seeing things and they're like, whoa, this feels like a new bright sign. It's a very rewarding moment because we haven't completely revamped the company or what we look like. Purple is our color, but we introduced secondary colors. And that was hard for some people to even absorb. We're still kind of towing that line with how much to expand beyond purple, but we felt like it was necessary. And I think people are definitely starting to adopt. And so I think it can take time, but I do feel like when you see or hear others on the outside making comments, that's when you can prove to say,
absolutely, yeah,
right? We're doing the right
by
thing.
The way, I love your purple.
It's done well for us. I have to say, it's done very well.
I love it. But you've got the right purple, and that's what's important. You've kind of got that high energy, bright neon-y purple, which looks amazing even on the signs in the background that I'm looking at right now. It's amazing. And I think when we talked the other day, I said how I love on my iPhone that when when you're doing that sort of airdrop or touch with your phone to another phone, and it does that funky neon kind of vroom around the outside, it's that purple, it's that energy, it's that, I don't know, it's like that forward thinking color that makes you go, oh, I really like this. So no, I love your purple. Anyway, that was not the question, was it not?
No, I think it was more like an observation, the fact that we can understand. And I think for you to take that on whole, like you're having to lean into a new color, and have a new logo, like it sounds scary, but it sounds like you were able to, it sounds like a success because you're hearing about it from the outside as well as the inside, that they're feeling like this just feels, on brand, or there's some kind of connection people are making with it.
And I think, what we looked at was behavior, not applause. And it was, how do we know it's working? How do we know it's resonating? How quickly did people adopt the name? And that was, because there wasn't a huge change. It was ultimately, replacing 3 letters for 3 numbers. I think that was quite an important move for us because it was not an entirely new change, but it was, what do analysts say? How have the media picked it up? What are the partners doing? Are they recognizing that as well? So internally, success showed up when the team stopped referring back to the old brand. And when the new narrative flowed naturally across the sales department and the products and the marketing team, we didn't need to reinforce it because it was already happening, which was, I guess, going back to the sort of shedding skin piece. Everybody wanted to embrace it, so that was fairly easy. And then in terms of sort of having this conversation, as I said I'd had at the town hall, it was when people put their hands up and just said, we love it, which is just great. So I think if you have to keep reminding people of the brand, it hasn't landed well.
Well, I think sometimes what ends up happening with brands is they actually overcomplicate it. And I think the simpler you are in terms of your brand positioning and those moments, I think the better off you are. And again, going back to our experiences, we tried to tell this big story because we have a very powerful story with what we do, but we tried to tell that story in its entirety to everybody. And quite honestly, not everybody cares about the entire story. So you have to understand and know when to scale back. And I think that's an important piece when it comes to these rebranding and branding exercises is knowing what's really important and coming to that agreement and making sure that's the piece that pulls out. Every piece of history for a 20, 30, 55-year-old company isn't really the thing that needs to come out in the brand, right? It can come through organic conversations that follow after. But I think keeping it simple is probably, I think, one of the best things that brands can do in this process.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the other thing you can do is do it in bite-sized chunks. You can say, this is the logo, this is the new website, and these are the things that we're going to be rolling out next. And then you can move on to your partners and say, okay, when you're looking at your website and you maybe have a find a partner section, it's making sure that all your partners know. And I think actually that's another really important point, is communicating to those businesses that your business touches as well, and making sure that they have the new brand guidelines, that they have the new logos in every format that they could possibly wish to use them, that the door's open to the marketing department for any other things that they feel they may need. And I think that we're at that point now where we are pushing very heavily towards a far bigger focus on our partners. So we are making sure that we have all of that in a packaged up way. There's brand guidelines, there's the tone of voice, there's these are all the color palettes and the variations of the color palettes, and these are all of the logo formats that you have. So I think the easier you can make it for everybody to adopt is also hugely important.
So we've talked a lot about, this is like the Anywhere Now, at least, rebrand seemed to go swimmingly and things kind of worked in your favor and all of that. But whether it be the Anywhere Now or any of the other rebrands, what was the hardest part, or what is the hardest part behind the scenes that others don't know or see, and just that honesty and transparency?
Okay, so there's one company that I have worked with, and it was founder led. And when I started working with them, the brand, again, was just tired. It was just tired. And we did this extensive rebrand, which everyone really loved. And when I left, they changed it back to all the wishy-washy colours that they'd had before. So you're kind of like, but the really important piece there is, and that's maybe one thing that we haven't touched on, is how do you measure the impact? Not just, having people saying, oh, I love it, or I don't love it. It's, how do you measure that quantifiably? So you can look at the hits on your website, you can look at the increases in your LinkedIn followers, you can look at, if you've done a press release, how far did that go? What was the reach? How many clicks did you get? And obviously that has a massive impact. For us, it did with, launching on publicly. But I think, if I had my time again, I'd love to have gone back and seen what impact that change to the wishy-washy colours had from the spike that it had initially had to where it went once they changed, because I just looked at it and went, oh, okay. But it actually told a story of what was actually happening in that organisation at the time. So I guess it's just interesting, isn't it?
Well, I think like we started this, the beginning of the conversation, that's about that company is doing it for themselves versus for the, because I think sometimes there's so much passion internally that we make our own decisions for our own brand, but sometimes you've got to be able to see and appreciate how it's resonating or how people are responding to it, and just being okay with that, even though if you're not necessarily 100% comfortable because it's change.
I think that for that particular organization, it summed everything up. It absolutely summed everything up. So for me, you just walk away and just go, you can't change everything. You can't change, as you say, if it wasn't a decision based on who they wanted to be, it was who that person wanted to be. Very different, very, very different.
Yeah, and it doesn't come without a pretty hefty price tag, right? I mean, we haven't even talked about that, but I mean, these exercises are not inexpensive, from the design elements to the execution elements to the potential, either hopefully gain in business, right? But if you get it wrong, right, the potential loss of business, like we mentioned at the very onset, right? Those are all really important pieces that I think, have to be part of the discussion when you're looking to undertake something of this, because it is much more than just visually changing a logo. There's a lot more that's impactful and a lot more that's at risk that I don't think a lot of people think of. And to your point, you really need that buy-in, because if one person leaves and the rest of the organization thinks, oh, well, we'll just revert back to who we were, I would say that we probably weren't ready to make that change. You didn't, those people were not there to start, and you need that in order to make it successful, because people within the company, the ambassadors of the brand, right, need to be 100% behind it. That's what makes it successful.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and the ambassador piece was very important for us, specifically around our partner ambassadors. So we got them on board. We took them through it. We took them through why we were doing it and where it touched them, and, gave them different backgrounds, made sure they were part of the story. You helped them push it out internally within their business. So absolutely. But to go and create something that you think, and I use this, and I don't know if this will resonate with your entirely global audience, but certainly for Europe, it might. You can't go and create Harrods on the outside and then open the door and have Poundland on the inside. We're talking Cracker Barrels.
Poundland.
I don't know Poundland.
Cracker Barrels and Poundland here. But it does what it. Okay, call it a dollar shop. I don't know. Yeah. Yeah, and you pick something up and you go, "Oh, how much is this?" It's like, "Oh, it's £1." Actually, I think it's gone out of business. I wonder why. But you can't go and make something look beautiful with no substance. And you have to think about that. You have to make sure that what the brand touches, you've thought about deeply, and that you have those departmental buy-ins from everybody. And I think that's really important as well, because obviously this another piece that the brand touches is your UX, and how does that roll out? And that is a hugely all-encompassing project that the UX team had to buy into. For us anyway, now it wasn't just about making sure we're using the color palette correctly. We have to make sure that, that we're a contact center solution where people are sitting in front of screens all day. And we were very conscious of making sure that people with visual impairments felt comfortable looking at the screen. So it was all of those things had to sort of be taken into consideration as well. So I think it's properly understanding what your brand touches and how you have to sort of make a list. I mean, that's what I did. I literally made the biggest list known to man. It's the biggest spreadsheet I think I've ever seen, and worked through it. But it's definitely just do a brain dump.
Yeah. Okay, Sarah, are you ready for our face? You're going into the hot seat.
I am. Oh my goodness, I'm quite excited about this. As long as I can, touch out at any point, that would be great.
Let's do it.
Welcome to the hot seat, Sarah Moss. Now step into the seat and show us who's boss.
Oh my goodness.
That's a great producer, Joey.
Oh my gosh. Please, can you send me that afterwards? I love it, Joey. Amazing. I could play it for my children and my husband every time they ask me a question. Amazing.
Yeah.
Can't wait.
Okay. In the spirit of today's episode, we're going to play Overhyped or Worth the Hype, the rebrand edition. So we're going to throw out a few common rebrand moves. So just give us your quick gut reaction. Is it overhyped or is it worth it? And that's just, you don't need to, you can say one word, you can expand a little bit upon that, but don't feel like you need to say much. We're just going to throw a couple at you and see your gut reaction.
Okay, you ready, Sarah? big splashy launch campaigns.
Ooh. Oh, wow. That was a really tough one, wasn't it? Just for the first question.
First come to mind. What's your initial reaction?
Overhyped.
Okay. Using AI in branding.
To help you write your brief, yes. To create the logo, no.
Okay. Interesting. Rebrands driven by a CEO or leadership change.
A new CEO.
A new CEO. Yeah.
These are really tough questions.
It's the hot seat.
I know.
You don't get the logo for nothing. Your jingle.
Maybe worth it.
Interesting. Okay.
Okay. Changing the company name entirely.
Worth it.
Okay, you survived.
Yeah, you survived.
There's no right or wrong. That was just good to get your gut reaction on that.
It's actually interesting because I think that some of them, like, the changing of the company, when we were prepping for this, Laura and I had a conversation. And here in the States, I was working for the telephone company, which was Bell Atlantic at the time. And we went through a rebrand to Verizon. And it was a complete shift in the name. And I can remember the amount of time that we used to spend just explaining to people that the name was Verizon and not Verizon. It took us forever just to get through that. And it was so simple, to be honest. And now it's, the V, that's it. That's all there is to it. And it's very, very simple and it's evolved over time. But I think it was worth it, but there's no shortage of, things that need to be considered during all of that. And I think that to your point, that master spreadsheet is the key to making sure that it's a successful launch. That was great.
Yeah. And I think that they were pretty tough questions, if I'm quite honest, because I think that you automatically go, well, I can apply that to here and it was okay, but if I was there, would it be the same? So I'm just going to precursor that and just say, okay.
A nice little CYA right there. Sarah.
Yeah, there's a little, yeah, absolutely. Please excuse me, anybody that disagrees.
Oh, no, you don't have to apologize for yourselves on this show. We don't apologize.
We love to be controversial. We love being
That's
why we're here.
People listening right now going, what on earth does she know? Yeah.
We'll be sure to forward them your email address. Don't worry.
And you can send them the jingle too. That's fine. If you can send the jingle, that's good. Yeah.
Yeah.
Perfect. All right. Well, thank you, Sarah, so much for joining us today. It's been a pleasure talking to you. We've learned a ton and we have a lot of similarities and some differences with our experiences. So it's been great to kind of talk through those and obviously introduce our audience to them.
No, I absolutely loved it. Thank you. Can we do this again next week?
Sure. Why not? Sarah, thanks so much for being here. Laura, I have to say one thing that actually really stood out for me, and this was based on the conversation that we had around what does success look like? And I think Sarah summed it up. Look for behavior, not applause. I think is actually a really key moment here in terms of things that people should be looking at, because none of us are doing this because we're looking for applause. We want to drive better behavior in the business and better results for the business as an overall. So that one really stuck out for me.
Yeah, and I think that the key to that is the internal behavior and the external behavior.
Yes.
Right? There has to be a shift in both places, because if you don't start seeing, again, it's like we always say we're all customer facing, right? We're all people that no matter what department we're in. So if there's some bit of behavior that's not changing internally, then it's not going to change externally. So I think that's super important on both sides.
Yeah, 100%
Absolutely.
agree.
Okay, well, thanks everyone for listening. And most importantly, if you liked what you heard today, be sure to follow us. If you want to hear more from Sarah Moss, you can find her on LinkedIn and listening to her new jingle.